In today's video, we're taking a look at some Montreal Canadiens trade rumors and some things we might see happen this offseason, including the futures of players like Max Domi and Karl Alzner, and could they take some of their prospects in the several draft picks they have lined up for 2020 to gain some stronger players to become more competitive sooner than later. We'll discuss all the latest coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, today we're taking a look at the Montreal Canadiens and some off-season speculation. Today's information comes from a recent article in The Athletic written by Arpon Basu, who does cover the Habs quite closely and knows the team quite well. He discusses a lot of different topics from Montreal in a mailbag type article, and I wanted to go over a lot of his opinions here in today's video. Now, first up, I want to take a look at the future of Karl Alzner. He does discuss the future of Karl Alzner in this article, and he basically comes to the conclusion that he feels that Karl Alzner is pretty much done in Montreal, and that he's either going to be traded or bought out this offseason. I mean, one of the things that people have been talking about recently is how Alex Romanov was assigned number 27, which was Alzner's number, which apparently Alzner wasn't even aware of. Upon writing this article, he reached out to Alzner for some comments on his future with Montreal, and basically he said that both sides kind of know where each other stand, and it sounded like a divorce was really close to happening here between the two sides. Obviously, Karl Alzner definitely sounds like he wants another crack at the NHL. That's not going to come in Montreal. I do think as we get further along into this contract that a trade is more likely, especially if the Habs are willing to retain some salary. Obviously, that would be a better scenario than doing a buyout, because they could save a little bit more money that way, because on a buyout they're tied to the contract for twice the length that's remaining, only on the hook for the same time frame that they're having right now. So clearly Alzner likely going to depart. I know that's not going to come as a huge shock, but there's been a lot of question marks around his future for quite some time, because it became very apparent very early in that contract after signing as a free agent that his play was not fitting in with Montreal, and his certainly was not living up to that contract at all. I mean, he had a pretty solid career with Washington prior to becoming a UFA, but things have really gone downhill and quick since he's joined Montreal. But if they can free him off their books for the coming season, that would certainly give them even more flexibility. Of course, the Habs are not in a bad cap situation anyway, but as some of their younger players start to graduate out of their entry-level deals, and if they do want to spend a little bit more trying to make this team more competitive, having as much flexibility, especially in a flat salary cap world for the next few years, will become that much more important. Now, of course, he also goes on to talk a lot about the draft picks they have for 2020, that they have so many, as well as a lot of their other prospects that are in the system. I mean, Montreal, I think, has done a pretty solid job at drafting over the past few years, or at least it looks that way right now. Obviously, we'll have to see some of these players develop and how they become regular NHL players, how much impact, and will really be a few years down the road before we can really better analyze that. But as of right now, the last few drafts have gone pretty well for Montreal, and they have another 14 picks lined up for the 2020 NHL draft. I can't imagine Marc Bergevin stockpiled all those draft picks to use all 14 of them at the draft and add another 14 prospects to his prospect pool, because there's just no way they can all play for Montreal. I mean, they have a decent group of young players already right now. You have young guys already on the roster like Kotkaniemi and Nick Suzuki. You got guys on the blue line like Akil Fleury, Victor Mete, Noah Jolson, who's obviously, they've all had, some level of experience back there. And then, of course, you have more guys coming like Ryan Poehling. You got Cole Caulfield. You got Caden Primo. You got Alex Romanov. You got Jesse Ylonen. Brooke. There's several others that are in the system, and there's just no way that they're likely all going to become longtime players on the Habs roster. So it does make a lot of sense that if you look at what they have in the system now and all those picks, they could turn some of that into current NHL players who can have an impact today instead of 2, 3, 4 years down the road. I mean, Montreal very well could end up with a high draft pick at the 2020 draft as well, and could make a big splash. I know I speculated before when we did our mock draft after the NHL draft lottery. If they lose against Pittsburgh, they have an opportunity to draft first overall and be able to draft, French-Canadian Alexis Lafreniere, who is expected to become a really top-notch franchise type of player. So that would be an absolutely huge addition for Montreal, and it could change the landscape in Montreal very quickly if they were fortunate enough to make that happen. Now, in that video, I did a draft lottery for part 2, and Montreal won the lottery. And it's like, really, if you think about it, though, from a story perspective, at least, it would make a lot of sense. And I think of all the teams that have a shot at him that are in the play-in series, I think you can make an argument that Montreal does need him the most. I mean, the other 7 teams that are not in those play-in series probably need him more, but they're not eligible right now for that selection. So amongst the teams that are, I think the Habs are in most need, and it would be a great story, as I said, for the French-Canadian top hockey player to play in Montreal. It's been a long time since they've had somebody who fits that criteria be a top star for their franchise. So I do expect Marc Bergevin to be very active at the 2020 NHL Draft, which is at this point it's looking like it's going to be in October. And I do think that it's quite possible that some of these prospects could be moved out and used to obtain other players right now. Like I said, that can come in and have an immediate impact. Now, speaking of players having an immediate impact, let's talk about the future of Cole Caulfield, arguably one of their top prospects right now in their system. Now, in this article, he was asked about the future of Caulfield and where he might end up playing next year. They saw him playing in the NHL, AHL, where's he going to end up? Obviously, right now, he's still technically with Wisconsin in the NCAA, but the NCAA season is certainly in jeopardy. It's not looking like they're going to be able to have a season, at least not on time. So clearly, NHL teams are going to be scrambling to find places to play for many of their players and their prospects. We've already seen the announcements that some players are likely heading to Europe. Wouldn't be surprised if we see many more, because they're right now looking like they will get started in the fall on time. There's still some debate right now around the Canadian junior leagues, when they're going to be able to start, and there's still some optimism that they will start on time in the fall, but there's not a definite thing for sure. There is some doubt that could happen. The American Hockey League has already announced their season will be delayed. They're basically going to be mirroring a similar schedule that the NHL is for 2020, 2021. They're aiming to start in early December, which is kind of right around the time that the NHL is starting. I mean, right now, the NHL is hoping to have training camps in middle of November and start for December 1st. So many of these players could go to their NHL training camps, then get assigned to their American Hockey League teams, have a quick training camp there, and then start the season. So obviously, Montreal could have Cole Caulfield in Montreal or in the AHL, but he's going to have to sign his pro contract, which he is yet to do. And obviously, they're not going to do that until they feel he's ready. Basu talks about in this article that if they were going to sign Caulfield, that they would have done so when his season finished up. We know there was meetings between Bergevin and Caulfield, and obviously it looks as though they felt he wasn't ready to make the jump to pro hockey yet, which is why a contract wasn't signed. So many believe he was definitely going to do another year of college hockey, but obviously if that season is not possible, it is possible he could play in the Ontario Hockey League for the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds, who own his rights. Of course, that could always be traded as well to another OHL team, but he could play in that league, which is probably what the Montreal Canadiens would prefer based on Basu's opinion, because he doesn't, like he said, if he was going to play pro hockey, they would have signed him already, and they don't need to sign him for him to play junior. So obviously that would be another option. He could go there, dominate, continue to build his confidence, and kind of go from there. But obviously Cole Caulfield's likely at least one more year away from making the jump to the NHL. When Caulfield makes the jump to the NHL, it doesn't make sense to have him on fourth line duty, trying to play more of a defensive role or killing penalties, when that's not really his forte. He needs to jump into a top 6 role, I think, and be that scoring winger that they drafted him to be. So it makes sense to let him develop until he's clearly ready. So we'll have to wait and see what the future holds for Caulfield, but it wouldn't be surprising to see him possibly play in the OHL if the NCAA season is not going to start as planned. And of course, another guy to keep your eye on this offseason is Jonathan Drouin. Of course, I think these 2020 NHL playoffs are going to play a big role in his future. Clearly, he's been up and down, inconsistent during his time in Montreal. Hasn't quite lived up to the hype. Obviously, they gave up a prized young defenseman in Mikhail Sergachev, who's really excelling in Tampa right now to get Drouin on their roster. He wasn't that top center iceman they were hoping him to be. He's been more of a winger, and even then, he hasn't been the most consistent. Certainly with the Habs looking to address other areas of the team, it wouldn't be surprising to see his name in trade talk as well as we approach this offseason. Same goes for Max Domi, according to this article from Marpon Basu. Obviously, he talks about the fact that Domi is a player who they need to sign, and he feels that if Domi is signed by Montreal, that he will be signed and paid accordingly as a top 6 winger, not a top 6 centerman, because he feels that longer term, that is where Domi fits with his franchise. Yes, he's been playing center iceman mostly in the last year or so, but clearly, it's not something that I see him doing long term. And Domi, by many people, is looked upon as being a stronger winger, and as they develop some of these other center prospects like Nick Suzuki and like Jesperi Kotkaniemi, he expects them to be able to take over the center role, have Domi move to the wing, and obviously that would allow Montreal to pay him a little bit less as well. Obviously, this past season wasn't as good as the one before, so being a restricted free agent, he doesn't have a ton of leverage, but there certainly is some concern over what his long-term future holds in Montreal. Now, I said it before, I'll say it again, I can clearly see Max Domi seems to love being a part of Montreal, loves the atmosphere, loves the fans. They seem to, for the most part, really be fond of him as well. I'm not saying that they're definitely going to be trading Domi, but depending on how contract negotiations go, if Domi is willing to settle on a little bit cheaper contract, which would be paid for a winger than a center, and sign for a decent amount for a good term, maybe things work out, maybe he stays. But Basu goes on to talk about the fact that he feels there's a good chance they could use him as trade bait to really improve the blue line. So I guess it depends on what else they do. I think there's a lot of things that are going to depend on each other. We could see a bit of a domino effect. Obviously, if the Habs lucked out and get Lafreniere, well, he's obviously a top 6 winger. That guy makes a guy like a Durant or a Domi maybe a little bit more expendable to help other areas of the team. Our guys like Suzuki and Kotkaniemi and Philip Deneau, is that a strong enough group of center icemen that Domi should move to the wing? There's a lot of question marks in Montreal, and certainly a lot more answers that we're going to see. But I think that we can safely say that this offseason is going to be a very interesting one from General Manager Marc Bergevin. I do expect a lot of activity. I know in the past few years we've seen an offer sheet. We've seen him have a hard time, though, attracting unrestricted free agents. So it's difficult to say exactly what we're going to see. There's been a lot of talk about him putting that cap space to use that he's already been kind of saving here to go after some top either restricted or unrestricted free agents, and there's certainly plenty out there that he could consider offer sheeting, but hopefully if he does, he gets a little bit more successful than he did with Sebastian Aho last year. I know they thought that was going to work, but it wasn't quite enough to get the job done. We'll see if he goes down that road yet again in 2020. Let me know your thoughts on the Montreal Canadiens offseason plans. What kind of moves do you see them making? Do you see them being very active this offseason? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and we'll continue discussing further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.